Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? It is a pleasure to be hosting you again on our podcast entitled Free Lunch. This is Kim Karaoke, and I'm joined with the one and only Mr. Ken Gishinga. Ken, salimia wananchi. Say hi.
Hi, Kim. Great to hear from you. I hope you've been well since our last free lunch session. What are you eating today?
Today, I am doing the same thing I do every week, Ken. Enjoying my dish of hot water as I try to adhere to the true gospel of intermittent fasting.
I must say, Kim, you are not very good for the agricultural sector, and you need to find ways of supporting our agricultural sector.
Indeed, especially in these difficult times. No, what I try and do is I make up for it once my eating window arrives. Ken, how has your week been?
My week has been fine. It's been a very loaded week. Obviously, a lot of people were very keen to hear what the president would say on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the tone was on the gradual reopening. And that came with a lot of loaded implications, both some positively, maybe others less so. And what were your initial thoughts on that?
No, such a good point. I missed the presidential announcement. So when I was trying to fumble through to see what was happening, I just caught like a quick WhatsApp summary of the message, and then now try to look in social media to see what was actually said and how he articulated it. I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, the behavioral side of me is excited by the fact that this quarantine fatigue feeling will sort of come to an end. This feeling that we're locked down, cooped up in one county, we can't move, and we can't exercise our freedoms as much as we were before the crisis. But then on the other hand, I am a bit conflicted because as I looked at the president's full address, it became clear that yes, we have reopened, but the initial terms and conditions for full reopening, as were articulated about a month ago, weren't met. And so this sort of felt like, okay, we've made progress towards reopening. It's still not perfect. Go out and prosper and exercise extreme caution as you do. So I felt sort of sad that we didn't seem in that 1 month to have gotten as ready as we could be. And so there's a cloud of dread hovering over that, things might actually take a turn and cases might resurge, and then we may be back in a quagmire. What are your thoughts, Ken?
That's a very powerful reflection, and I was quite happy with the reopening, not just from an economics perspective. Obviously, I'm coming into this as an economist,
Correct.
But even from a health perspective. And I remember watching Sky News sometime in April, and they had some fantastic statistics.
Yep.
And they showed that in the month of April, they recorded the most deaths since records began in the 1970s, when I think John Major was prime minister. And I think what the Sky News economist was trying to point out was out of all those deaths, only 18% were COVID related. So there was a whole 81% of non-COVID related deaths that took place. And for me, I think these economists put things in perspective, in the sense that as we are thinking of health, we need to have a broad understanding of health. Yes, we need to make sure the people who have underlying conditions are well protected. But what the data was suggesting was 81% of people were dying from other things, such as mental health, such as being emotionally disconnected from family, I felt we needed a broader understanding of well-being, and that was sort of being ignored. So I think this is going to allow people to reconnect a bit, which is very powerful for things around mental health, things around emotional bonds, and people being able to have normal lives. So I was particularly happy on that. And of course, from the economy, people being able to transact and to trade, and because people have gone for 3 months without an income. And people are really living on the edge. Many people are really living on a wing and a prayer.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, I could see where the president was coming from.
Yeah, I mean, there were no easy decisions to be made, and he reflected on it in his speech. Even the month ago, when he announced that the measures would continue, even then it was a difficult conversation because the pain points in the economy were quite strong. The central bank was talking about MSMEs are going to close if they don't get urgent assistance. So I guess there were no easy options. There's still a trade-off between lives and livelihoods. And I totally agree with you in a sense that, it was now a chance to say, okay, what can we at least try? So I was listening yesterday to an episode where doctors were talking about how, reopening really has to be gradual, and because we're not waiting immediately for a cure to come through. You almost have to uh, step on the accelerator and step on the brake sequentially. So accelerate to open, and then as you see things changing, pump the brakes back up, so that you at least can resume and restore some lives, some livelihoods. And I agree. I mean, there are people who've been really hard up. People are now struggling and trying to think about, can they travel and go up country to be with their family, reconnect, maybe survive the next couple of months while the economy fully normalizes. It's great. I think from the public health side, I worry slightly because I had it put this way, in a very interesting way. Like, Corona has no legs, right? So Corona can only travel with as a when it's being carried by someone, and so there's a slight fear in my mind that we will see asymptomatic people transmitting the cases up country, and if counties aren't as ready to handle the contagion, then we may have a scenario that is closer to the doomsday scenario that we are all of us are trying to avoid. But yeah, I mean, behaviorally, I think folks were definitely between a rock and a hard place, and already the signs of melting were quite evident. And, people, this idea of quarantine fatigue, people were tired. There's no much money going around the economy. So curious to see how this all sort of unfolds in another 2 weeks. And that's the problem, is that we have to wait 2 weeks to see how cases behave, whether people are actually able to settle back in their upcountry homes. But yeah, it's gonna be a bit of a wait and see game.
Indeed, even more than people being tired of being at home, I was particularly worried about people being scared of going to hospitals to
Mm.
get treatment for their other conditions.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the things that came out when I researched what was happening in the hospitals,
Yeah.
many hospitals were actually very empty
Right.
because people were scared of going for their routine checkups. People who had some pre-existing conditions were not going for medication. So you had all other situations that were happening
Yeah.
because the world was central to this COVID.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this has led to a lot of losses. So I think if people now can go and return to getting their normal medication,
Right.
people, if that fear factor of going to a hospital can be lifted and people can sort of start getting medication for all the other conditions, because there are many other conditions that are afflicting Kenyans. For me, I think if that can happen, I think it would, I think even from a health perspective, it
Mm.
would be quite good. One of my friends is a radiologist, and
Mm.
he was telling me he's only working he has a 2-day shift in a
Oh.
week.
Oh
There's
wow.
literally nothing happening. So what about all the patients? What are people doing? So for me, I was very,
Interesting.
very worried about that. And the fact that people can now resume their regular treatment, I
Yeah.
think for me that comes as a sigh of relief.
No, it's very interesting you mentioned that, for a number of reasons. I think one, behaviorally, it seems like people then adhered to this idea of stay away from hospitals, try and keep safe, stay at home. But of course, that has had its own implications and effects. But on a flip side, so someone close to our family, the mother has been unwell for a couple of weeks, and finally they had to go seek treatment for their mom at the largest referral hospital in Nairobi. And it was tricky for the first couple of days because there was very little care that was being offered. The medical team was completely overwhelmed because of other cases, but also mainly COVID. And so there was a bit of anxiety and tension around, oh no, did we make the right choice? Is she getting the best quality care? What else can we do? And ultimately, what it all shook out to was, later on, we came to find that once the COVID results had come out, and it was clear that she was negative, the approach to treating her completely changed. Now they were like, okay, she's fine, she's okay, we can actually treat her. So I'm also seeing, I think what now seems to be happening in the facilities, and this is around the time, maybe for a bit of context, a few hospitals had been closed because there were COVID-19 cases that had come up. So, doctors and nurses were also having a bit of, understandable apprehension and fear to not to thinking about what is likely to happen. Are every patient coming in, are they COVID positive or not, or they are symptomatic or not? So I can also understand it from that perspective on the health provider side, that you're dealing with with a contagion that, yes, there are symptoms, but not everyone is symptomatic. And so someone might walk in, be totally fine, you treat them, you don't have a mask, they go away, all of a sudden now you have symptoms. So totally interesting and difficult times that we're in at the same time. But Ken, yeah, so
Indeed.
open. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, I'm just to flip side on the
Mm,
economic side. I'm also quite curious to know what your thoughts are, because yes, places are reopening, but one of the things that's missing in the economy is the demand. In terms of,
yes,
there's a very low purchasing when people have not been paid for over 3 months. The
yeah.
purchasing power is extremely low. What were your thoughts on that?
No, it's very true. And, anecdotally, again, there have definitely been a number of cases of folks who are really excited that now that the economy has been open, they can travel, only to go to the bus station and find, because of the new measures that have been put in place for public transport, there are very few vehicles in the first place. So then, two, the cost of the ticket is higher, and in sometimes it's a humongous amount. So someone who's spending like $2.50 to travel, maybe all of a sudden asked to spend $5 or more. And then there are also few vehicles because the number of the providers haven't been certified as COVID compliant. So it's a challenge all around. So people are stuck between having no food and no income in the urban area to wanting to travel to sort of offset the high upkeep costs in the city, and then not able to afford the cost of the ticket, or not even finding a vehicle. And so in the story that I was watching, that family tried to borrow some money from everywhere, but within their social networks, everyone is in the same scenario. And it wasn't even $5 that we're talking about. It was a jump between about $5 to like $15. And they're like, we can't afford this, we can't borrow. So it was, and even if we borrow, the folks that would lend to us don't have the money. So it's really tricky. It sounds like a place for someone to step in, or initiatives to be had to really help people to travel back home if they can't sustain and keep themselves safe in the city. Because I think of what happened for folks who are international flight. We had to resume some flights to repatriate Kenyans to come back home. In that scenario, maybe we should think about repatriating Kenyans who are particularly vulnerable in the urban area, but and have no other opportunity. But then again, there you go. You put the virus on wheels, and potentially can create problems.
Hmm. I think you've raised a very brilliant point of what I call a double whammy,
Yeah,
where you have people who have very low purchasing power on one side,
yeah,
but also facing higher than normal prices
yeah.
on the other side, because for businesses to make a profit, they need to change their business models. Buses are
Right.
carrying fewer people because of social distancing, so they have to increase their bus fares. But on the other hand, you're facing
Mm,
people who have not had a steady income for 3 months.
yeah,
So it's almost like they've been hit from both sides.
yeah.
And for me, the only way out personally for me would have been a cash stimulus.
Right.
And I I opined on it in last week's Sunday Standard,
Yeah.
where even if you could pump in about 200 billion shillings,
Yeah.
and that's about 10,000 shillings for about 20 million working people, you can start getting activity back, because what the economy needs is activity, people
Correct.
buying and selling and transacting.
Correct.
If they can do that, I think that can be a fantastic thing. It's worked very well in India.
Yeah.
It's worked well in the United States, in many
Yeah.
countries.
Yeah.
So people are realizing the things about fiscal stimulus is, it excludes a lot of people who are not in those tax brackets. But if you can do monetary stimulus, where really, and the beauty about Kenya, where everybody has a mobile money account, if you can be able to utilize that, you can really start boosting demand, and people can really start transacting. What do you think about that?
No, it's a very good idea, and I think part of the problem, like you're sort of saying, is because we've also killed demand because of flattening the curve. We really do need to do something to bring demand back up. We need to think about how do we get cash into the hands of needy Kenyans, so that folks can actually unlock demand. Potentially, we talked about vouchers in a previous episode. If we had some sort of even a transport voucher for folks who are really hard pressed, can go get a transport voucher to help them move up and down. Like, surely there are things that we can do to make it easier on the bulk of the economy, the 80% of us who are informally employed, who've really just taken a pounding. And sometimes it's easy to villainize the public sector. But then when you also realize that because of the travel restrictions, they've also been shut down. So they also weren't working for 3 months. If the vehicle that would travel, 500 kilometers every or at least twice a day, all of a sudden can't leave. So he's also been out of pocket. So he's also now trying to think about, how do I recoup my costs and show up my reserve in the shortest amount of time before, God forbid, the restrictions are enforced again. So everyone is really in this caught up in this double whammy, as you're talking about. It's almost like a triple and quadruple whammy that we need to explore, holistic and timely solutions to really help, and in a timely way. Because really, it's just sad when you think that someone is stuck in the city, can't leave, someone can't travel because they can't afford it, and then if they travel, there's a risk of them contracting the condition, the disease. And something else that happened this week, and maybe this is good for a different episode, is the fact that also at the same time, schools have been indefinitely closed, which then also means, likely as parents are still juggling their options, there'll be a tendency or an interest to maybe send their children up country so that they can sort of survive the crisis in the city, which also then opens up another opportunity for the virus to move from the urban to the rural area. So no easy decisions, I suppose, at this point, even on that piece. But you're right. I definitely agree with some sort of a stimulus directly targeted at unlocking demand and stimulating consumption again.
And I love how you've raised the issue of the school's closure, which is a humongous decision. I think we might need a whole episode on that, because it has lifetime implications on students. But in terms of really thinking how much money is allocated to the education space, it's about 550 billion.
Yeah.
If the government can say, since this calendar year has been accidentally, or for whatever what they want to use, forfeited, we're going to use half that budget of 550.
Right.
That's about maybe 225.
Yep.
And pump it directly into the economy.
Yeah, there you go. There's your money for the stimulus. Yeah.
Started. Yes, I think you can find money for getting things back on track. So I really hope somebody in the education and treasury space are thinking along those lines, because a lot of people will ask, what will happen to that 550 billion that has been allocated for that?
Correct. It's such a very powerful point. Folks will want to know what is going on what's that money going to? And the interesting thing about all of this is that the ministry has said, or at least the Teacher Service Commission has said, no, public school teachers will continue and be paid irrespective of the fact that schools have been closed. And not only that, they're also getting an increment. So part of that 550 will be swallowed up by the increment and repaying and paying teachers, public school teachers, which is not a bad thing. So there's a bit of a stimulus there if you want to look at it. So it's a very targeted stimulus at public school teachers. But then what about for private school teachers, right? What about for those who were in private school? Private school has been stopped. It's unclear right now whether, if schools say we're going to continue doing distance learning, if parents will be as excited, given that the next term they their kids will be in the same class, right, in the same grade. So why spend this school fees now? Let me spend the school fees in, in the new year. So assuming even the parents had that stimulus, I mean, had that salary or had the income to pay for school fees in the next term, and that was scheduled to begin in September, you could argue that maybe the government has given an implicit stimulus to parents, right? So they've told them, don't pay school fees, you'll get a refund, but now you can use that school fees money to something else. But I don't think that necessarily how it's going to play. I think that any saving from school fees from September, or even if parents were going to be able to afford school fees in September, was going to be diverted to sort of more pressing needs just to keep the family afloat.
I completely agree. I mean, just to get a refund from the tax authorities in Kenya is not an easy task, much
Correct.
less a school.
Correct.
Um, I think I it's I think for me my heart goes out to the students
Mm.
because the research that I'm receiving from the UK is when young people stay out of school for a long time,
Yeah.
uh, they have some lifetime challenges that come up
Yeah.
in terms of catching up.
Yeah.
And even when young people stay out of the workforce
Yeah.
for a long time, they find it much harder to reintegrate. And this is some of the research that's guiding
Mm.
the UK approach to really keeping, number one, young people in the workplace,
Yeah.
and number two, kids in school, because I don't know if it's just a fact of the brain development,
Mm-hmm.
but research sort of suggests that when people leave those places of work or education for an extended time,
Yeah.
there's a disproportionate outcome in terms of coming out. So for me, I'd love to see the research we are using here. I wish they would
Yeah.
publish some of
Yeah.
the research that's guiding the directives, because I
Yeah.
think there's some lifelong choices we are making and we might not even know we are making.
Correct. And now that you've talked about that, there's the issue as well on early childhood pregnancy. If even during our normal school calendar, the long holidays are often very risky for young girls. And already we saw in the first few months of the crisis that there was a surge in teenage pregnancy. One can only wonder what happens once we sort of shut down the academic calendar for primary and secondary school students. Although on the flip side, university students are continuing, but then I feel like that will also, given that that is also a more difficult group to make sure they're social distancing, they're adhering to guidelines, that could also now be a place where we get flare-ups of the crisis of corona.
Very, very true. What are you looking forward to next week or the next few weeks in terms of being assessing whether we've made good choices or not?
Good question. I think if we can see an uptick in business activity, I'm sure somebody has to be tracking these metrics. Maybe it'll be KNBS commissioning a study or someone else. It'd be great to sort of see if there's business activity that's picking up. I'm pretty sure somebody's doing a poll right now to understand the level of optimism or fear that Kenyans have now that the crisis has been, at least now that the containment measures have been lifted. So really interesting to see if perceptions have shifted, if people are more upbeat, more excited, or the reverse. Also keen to see if the private sector institutions The public and private universities open up if learning can sort of resume? Because I feel like if that goes well, if the lecturers are able to continue um, with offering classes in some sort of disciplined way, I think that will begin to shift the government policy, and likely stakeholders will begin to aggressively lobby the government to reopen at least learning for some of the students if we can keep the COVID-19 infection curve flattened. And so that's the fourth thing I look forward to seeing is how will Kenyans exercise the type of behavior that we expect them to during the crisis to keep themselves and their families safe, and at the same time uh, go about their businesses and activities to restore their livelihoods. Good question, Ken. What about you? What are you looking forward to?
And I think, first of all, you've touched on two areas that I'm very passionate about and nobody is doing. Number one is the gauge of business activity.
Mm-hmm.
I think we get fragments from different spaces, and it's one thing that I think moving forward, I would really love to be able to compile all the data that you're getting from mobile money transactions to. I don't think I've seen a good aggregate. And number two is what you call the perceptions. I know the CBK every quarter interviews bank executives in terms of their outlook on inflation and such. But I think we need a broader assessment of how people feel about the future. And I love what in the United States they do. They have the Consumer Confidence Index, which I think is extremely powerful, and it's mostly done by the University of Michigan. Right. And it really involves calling about 5,000 households and really asking them two questions. Do you feel better or worse, and why? And I feel that's an area I'd love also to be able to do, because I don't see anybody doing it. And I think it gives you a pulse
Correct.
of sort of people are doing. But I think personally, in terms of just adding on to those two, I think it would really to look at, I love looking at things such as mobile money transactions.
Right.
They have been going down. A lot of people have been taking advantage of the zero rating of transactions below 1,000. In fact, one behavioral trait that's coming out, and I think it would be excellent for your research, is how people are chopping down the transactions. So if I wanted to send you 5,000 shillings, I convert them into 900, 5, 6, 7 times. And, Safaricom has been asking the CBK, can we put a cap on how many slices Ken is sending to Kim?
Right.
So there's some very interesting, very, very, very interesting things that are coming out. And I think it will have long-term implications, because people will be like, oh, wow, we can actually send things cheaper if we can slice them.
Exactly. And that's going to continue for the rest of the year. It's not even like a COVID-19 specific measures until the economy back up. So I can imagine. Interesting. I didn't even thought of that. And it goes to show you how resilient and creative and smart Kenyans are when they have to make decisions and quickly pivot in the wake of new information. It actually seems to fly in the face of everything we would be thinking about when you think of low income, low value transactions that, they may not be as salient on, the ongoings or the tariffs and the changes, but clearly, people are updating information and changing behavior in response to it. So really interesting. I think as we finish, Ken, it might be useful to come to parting shots. I think my parting shot is, everyone, let's try and keep safe. Let's try and ensure that we can resume our livelihoods and at the same time not migrate the virus up and down, continue with the same social protection measures, and just try your best in the next couple of weeks to make sure that you and your families stay safe and protected.
I think that's a great parting shot. I think my parting shot is just an appeal to Kenyans. Let's start asking questions. This is unprecedented times. Everything is new, and nobody has a monopoly of wisdom. Correct. And I would love people to start asking questions about the future of work, questions about how to build culture when you're working from home, questions around. So I'd love people to just start, because this is an opportunity to almost build a whole new body of knowledge, but it can only begin when people are asking questions and really trying to inquire into the future. I think we have a great opportunity to rebuild everything, but we must start by asking questions. So I guess even to our audiences, let us know what you're thinking. Tell us really what are we missing, or what are we not looking at? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Correct. And if you travel domestically from July 15th, all the best. Keep safe and let us know what your experience is. We'd love to talk about that as well. All right, cheers. So I think that's it from my end, Mr. Gishinga. Anything from your end?
That's it from me. Just want to wish our guests a lovely weekend. Keep safe. Wash your hands. Maintain the regulations by the Ministry of Health, and see you next week.
That's a double whammy for me as well. Enjoy yourselves, guys. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.